So one of my favorite things to do is read. I love reading books and I love talking about books. And primarily I tend to read more series, but there are so many good standalone books out there. So today I'm going to share my 5 favorite standalone books as of this moment, and in no particular order. Very first one is probably one of my absolute favorite books, and that is John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, which I don't actually have my copy of right now, but that's what it looks like. A lot of you watching probably already know about The Fault in Our Stars, either because you've read it or because you've either seen or heard something about the movie that came out this summer. I think it's a really beautifully written story, and I like the way that John Green writes a lot. He's probably my favorite author. I had to plug my camera in because it died. Anyway, what I was saying. I think he does a really good job of portraying how realistic cancer can be in a way that's not romanticizing it, even though a lot of the fans tend to do that, which I don't really understand at all, but he himself does not do that. And I just think it's a really, really great story. Another one of my absolute favorite standalone novels is one that I read this year, and that's Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I'd first heard of her whenever I read Fangirl, and I decided I really liked her writing style, so I decided to read this one, and I absolutely loved this book. I feel like there are a lot of young adult authors out there that write about teen romances and make them just too sappy and unrealistic. It felt like she remembered more and wrote more like what it's like to fall in love for the first time. Even though I haven't personally fallen in love before, just reading these words felt a lot more real to me than most authors make it seem, and I really liked that. And what's cool about this book is, even though it's a fairly recent book, it's set in the 1980s, so it's got all of this older technology. It really just takes you back, even though I wasn't around in the 80s. A lot of that technology was still relevant whenever I was a kid, and so it was really cool to read a book that was set back there, because you don't really see that very often. A lot of young adult authors tend to write in the now, which is fine, but this was very unique because of that. The story itself is kind of sad at points, but it's definitely a good read. It's definitely one of my favorite books, and look at how pretty the cover is. I'm a sucker for pretty covers. Another one that I really like is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. I actually read this my junior year of high school whenever I was doing a research paper. I picked this author because I'd always wanted to read this book, and it actually turned out to be one of my favorite books. It's a pretty old book. It's from the 60s, and it's about a mental institution, and there's a movie that was made starring Jack Nicholson, which was very excellent, I think. And if you so desire, pick up a copy or at least watch the movie. Fourth on my list is Looking for Alaska by John Green. This is very close up to being my favorite John Green book. It's very, very close to Theos. And this is actually his very first novel. So as far as his writing goes, you can tell as you read more of his books how his writing has progressed. But the story itself is just so good. It's about a kid who decides to go from public school to a private school in Alabama, I think? Yes, in Alabama. And when he gets there, he meets several people, including this girl named Alaska. And this girl changes his life in many different ways. And it's a really fantastic story, and it's very, very high up to being my favorite John Green book. Theos just barely beats it. And they're apparently turning this one into a movie as well. I don't really know how I feel about that, but that's a rant for a different video. So yeah, last on my list is another one that I read this year for the first time, which is 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. This is a book that I've been wanting to read for several years now, and I walked into Half Price Books and they had a copy, and I decided to give it a go. And even though it looks kind of thick, it doesn't take that long to get through because it's just so good. It's one of those stories where it's not a good book because it's a happy story. This story is very haunting and kind of devastating. It's about this guy who gets this box full of cassette tapes in the mail, and on the cassette tapes is the voice of one of his classmates who recently committed suicide and decided to leave her suicide note on these cassette tapes, and decided to get them all passed down to each person she felt was one of the reasons she wanted to commit suicide. And so he has to listen to all the tapes to figure out why he's on them. This book really made me think about how my actions can affect other people, because I feel like that human beings don't really think about that a lot, especially like the very minor stuff. But after I read this book, it made me think about how even the littlest thing that I do can affect someone that wouldn't even occur to me. This book, it's a very devastating story, but it's also very beautiful, and I'm definitely going to pick this up and read it again one day. So this is just some of my favorite standalone books, and I am a nerd who likes to talk about books. If you have any book recommendations, leave them in the comments below, and Erin, I'll see you Thursday.